Welcome to Earth to the Other Side. Tonight I am speaking with Bri Laferty, who had a near-death experience back in 2017. And also what's very interesting is she is a end-of-life doula. Welcome, Bri, to the show. I'm so happy to have you. Let's hear about your experience.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. So exciting to meet another end-of-life doula. I don't meet too many of them, even though it is an up and growing profession. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, for
I'm
me
glad
too.
to be
It's
here.
true. I rarely meet them, except when I was studying it. Anyways, it's really nice to have you. So let's go back to 2017. What happened on that day? What caused your near-death experience?
Yeah, so 2017 just feels like yesterday still. I grew up with interesting kind of paranormal metaphysical experiences, as well as a chronic rare illness. And the reason I mention that is both of them come into play in 2017. So, dealing with my illness for already a decade and a half, dealing with these paranormal experiences, and in 2017, they came to a head together. Um, we had done a ton of research, and when I say we and my mom, mostly my mom, I didn't do any research about my illness and different ways to treat it. The medical system had really failed me and us entirely, and so we reached out to a ton of holistic options: Reiki, Chinese medicine, massage, chiropractic, acupuncture, mindfulness, hypnosis. I mean, the list is very extensive. So by the time I'm in my mid 20s, a decade and a half into these experiences, my mom, avid researcher, came across a thing called spirit release therapy. It's when you get attached with entities that aren't polite to your soul nor your body. And she heard sometimes they can cause illnesses. And why not try it? Why not try getting them released to see if it is the magical cure? And so we went down that path. We found a uh, hypnotist um, who specialized in spiritual regression therapy and spiritual release therapy. And so it was remote, and she warned that during this process, you might become a little ill with, kind of intestinal bugs. It seems like a bug, but it's just this releasing of energy and all this stuff that's just causing physical symptoms, which makes sense. That's why we're there to release spiritual things causing physical symptoms. And she was partially right. She was right that I would get sick. She underestimated and understated how sick I would get. I became very, very ill. I could not keep fluid in and or food or anything, so I became physically ill, and that caused a bunch of issues. I refused to go to the doctor. Once again, the medical field had already let us down immensely. So I'm like, I'll just tough it out. Like I've toughed it out for the last decade and a half. However, there came a point where I was exhausted spiritually and physically, mentally, and emotionally. And my mom and I had been in prayer for the last few nights, mostly, once again, her. I had my own battles with this thing that I was taught was God and raised in. He hadn't helped me before. So she was in prayer. Although, just 2 in the morning on April 27th, 2017, I was done. I could not do it anymore. My body was exhausted. It had nothing to give. My soul was exhausted. It had nothing to give. I had no hope, nothing but exhaustion and illness. And I said goodnight to my mom, saying I needed to get some sleep, even though I knew that wasn't what I was going to do. And I knew she needed sleep. So I hung up the phone with her around 2 a.m. and I surrendered completely. I called out to this God. I didn't even know who I was calling out to at this point. I called out so many times before with no answers, but this was different. This time I called out with everything. I called out with my heart, my soul, my mind, my body, every essence of me. I said, I cannot do this anymore. I surrender completely. This is in your hands. If you exist, do whatever. I'm done. And instantly, I got this wave over me, and all these dark entities that have been plaguing me for 15 plus years were ripped from me. I had this immense sense of peace just comfort me like a weighted blanket. It was something amazing. And then I felt tapping in the palms of my hands and my feet, and I heard this big booming voice. And I can't tell you where the voice came from. It wasn't external, it wasn't really internal, but it was 100% real. It said, "Are you ready?" Well, that's curious. What am I ready for? I don't know. I don't care. Something just answered my prayer, though. Yeah, I'm ready. And just like that, I felt 3 hard pounds on my chest and my heart stopped. And just like that, I was detached from my body. I had no recollection of my body, not really any recollection of Earth. I just ended up in this beautiful, dark, velvety void, just filled with love. And I'm there just as pure consciousness with the the thing that answered my prayer, whether that be God, the creator, source, whatever you want to call it. It's bigger than any of these boxes we put it in. But I was there with someone, something that answered my prayer. And it was pure love and knowledge. And it was fascinating. And I had this thought cross through my mind, am I dead? And 3 monks kind of float by and give me a shit-eating grin like, if you only knew. And was once again just thought, well, that was curious. And then I go through a tunnel. So my tunnel came after the void and detachment of my body. But this tunnel was amazing. It was this vivid blue filled with ones and zeros. I'm going through it at warp speed, kind of horizontally. And I know my soul's being downloaded with amazing information. And not knowing what that information is at the time, I just knew it was information and incredible, and I'm being downloaded. And I end up in this white space full of huge black numbers. And I grab these numbers on the floor, even though there's no floor, it was like a floor. I grab these numbers and I throw them up like a little kid, it up in the air, and said, "No wonder you love creating things." Because I realized at that moment the universe was created with math. And I don't know why I was so excited that it was created with math. I don't think I'm that big of a math nerd, but it was so exciting, like childlike curiosity and joy. And there's a consciousness behind me. I would compare them to the Christ consciousness in other religions. We call them the master teachers, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, these Christ consciousnesses. But as one entity behind me. So I never saw a face, I just felt the presence. The next area I'm in is filled with other beings. So other beings that are also experiencing things that I'm experiencing. It wasn't necessarily what I would consider a heaven nor a hell, more like a holding space, but it was just pure curiosity. It was elatement. I saw beings sliding down trees covered in snow, and I thought, I don't think I like snow. Instantly turned to lush green forest, and I'm sliding down them and realize, oh my gosh, what if these other beings are experiencing their own reality at the same time I'm experiencing my reality, but we're experiencing different realities together. And it was just so exciting. We ended up dancing together as if we choreographed for millennia. And we communicated without even words or sound. And it's more than telepathy, because usually you think you have a thought, someone, hears your thought and responds with a thought. It was so much faster and instantaneous than that. There was no language. It was just instant knowing. It was phenomenal. And I'd have a thought, it happened. I had multiple bodies, and I call them beings because I have no idea if they were ever human. I didn't know. I just knew there are other souls in these fun different bodies. I probably had 4 different bodies at this point, plus the energy body where I was void of any body. Then we get to this space, and here in our 3D world, you can see beyond a barbed wire fence. You can clearly see what's on the other side. But in my experience, there was this barbed wire fence, but beyond it was blurry, just like my background. You couldn't see beyond it. And it didn't register to me that I should have been able to. It was just another curious. And some of these beings started crossing through an opening on a land bridge to another space that I couldn't see. And I wasn't told I couldn't go or asked if I wanted to go. I just knew I couldn't, which is then when I ended up in the last space of my experience. And I'm in this, felt kind of like a smaller area. And there's 7 magnificent beings behind me. There's been several theories of who they are. I'm still not certain to this day what these extremely phenomenal beings were or who they were. I just knew they represented great power and wisdom. And in front of me is this scroll, and it's beautiful and it's unrolled, and there's golden, sparkly script that's being written on it. And that's when my ego decided to come back. And I thought, you're showing this to a human. And just like that, the scroll rolled up and I was snapped back into my body. And it's a weird thing to feel your heart stop, but it's a whole nother to feel your heart start again.
I bet. Wow, that's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you think that they imparted a bunch of wisdom and guidance to you while you were there that you don't maybe, maybe it's not in the forefront of your memory right now, but maybe it's something that was given to you sort of, I don't know, I'll say subconsciously in a human, in an
Yeah. So
earthbound
I'll
kind of
go
way?
back to knowing I was being downloaded. So I know the information is there in my soul and my subconscious for when I need it. Parts of that information has already come out to fruition when I needed it. So I know it will unravel as time goes on as I need it. So absolutely. Although the scroll, I don't know. I don't know if I've got access to that information or not.
Hmm. I wonder.
Definitely through the tunnel though.
You said you did dabble a little bit with some hypnotism, right?
Yeah, so my first experience with hypnosis was as a teenager to try to get some help for my chronic illness.
Did I
And
say hypnotism? I meant hypnosis.
I knew what you meant.
Sorry, go on.
Um, so yeah, I did go see a hypnotist for hypnosis as a teenager trying to get help with my illness and my condition. And it did provide some relief and gave me some great insights that were very helpful towards my trajectory going on. But looking back, you have no idea the impact that things make at the time.
Mhm.
Um, and
Can you
then
talk about some of the things that were revealed to you through the hypnosis?
so at the time of hypnosis, as a teenager, not much was revealed, just some things that happened in my past. And, it just really, it was for sleep. So it wasn't really spiritual. Um, and then I hadn't seen a hypnotist again for quite a long time. Although I think Dr. Joe Dispenza is a mass hypnotist and calls it meditation. he helps you get to meditation through hypnosis, which is phenomenal. I went to one of his retreats and it was definitely mass hypnosis, but it's different states of subconsciousness, basically. And I actually got certified in hypnosis myself. So, hypnosis is just, I think, an earlier stage of meditation. Meditation is right on the other gap. So whether you meditate, a lot of people start off with self-hypnosis and then get into that deeper state.
Did you grow up in any particular religion when you were a kid?
Yeah, so I grew up in I guess they considered a Christian household, and we went to a few different churches, but I forgot what the first two were. I know the last one considered themselves non-denominational.
Mhm.
Um, but it was very hard for me because the paranormal and metaphysical things I experienced, like seeing auras and ghosts and entities and things that shouldn't, according to the church, exist or be real, or they're of the devil. And here I am, this saved Christian girl and, trying to live a devoted life. And I keep seeing these horrible things. And our church said, poo-pooed it and kind of said it was of the devil. And then, said, if you're saved, you can't be, hurt by these dark entities. And yet here I am being hurt by these dark entities. So everything I was raised with was a contradiction to my experiences. So I had a really hard time with what God was and what religion was until after my near-death experience, I went searching for the answer. I was like, who has it right?
How do you feel like maybe it's changed you, or has it changed you? Like, what kind of things have changed, or were you
Yeah.
left with any new abilities or anything since coming back, or
Yeah,
anything like that?
absolutely. So it changed me on definitely the religious standpoint. I went on a deep dive, which has helped me in the end of life doulaing as well, helping multiple people across multiple cultures and religions. This is a controversial statement, but it's only my own experience I'm sharing. I found that there's no right or wrong religion. I think each one has pieces right and each one has pieces wrong. And so I think if it helps you, that is so important. And so that changed me drastically. And who I know to be God or the creator source, I've got a personal relationship. So that changed me immensely. At first, I kind of hid from the experience and pushed it down, not understanding what it was or how it had helped. Went back to my career in construction as a marketing professional and just went back to my old life until things came to a head. I got a dream job offer and I was about to go full speed ahead. And it was a few months after brain surgery. And my mom had a heart to heart with me and said, this is going to be a lot of work on your healing brain, your physical human brain that needs healing. Do you want to go in and blow it? And I broke down. I said no. And so I got the most incredible offer to go stay with my parents for a year to heal from brain surgery and take a break. And in that break, I fully embraced my near death experience and all the things I'd learned from my chronic illness and found a thing called a death doula or an end of life doula and dove straight into that. I volunteered for hospice 2 years for 2 years after my NDE. I was so drawn to end of life work. So I found out being a death doula or an end of life doula, I could help on a much grander scale. So I dove straight into that. I started my own business and now I am a death and spiritual doula, providing people with help both towards the end of their life with spiritual healing and, just helping them feel comfortable about the process of the biggest transition of their earthly life, as well as helping people who still have a lot of life left to live, but learn how to break free from the chains of chronic illness. So drastically changed from helping a company win a job to build something to helping people build their lives and their spiritual lives. So yeah, I'd
That's
say that's a big
incredible.
change.
Yeah, it's a big change. It's incredible. It's a great change. I mean, both are good and have their qualities, but we need as many, people like yourself as possible out there, especially I would say nowadays. Let me ask you, in your work as a doula, as a death doula or end of life doula, how often does, your experience with the NDE or even the topic of your NDE come up when you're, in these healing spaces?
Yeah, so I love that question. Usually, my clients find me because of my talks on my near death experience. Not necessarily do I share my experiences with my clients if that's not how they found me. Um, I like to act as a mirror and a reflection for people. I don't want to impose my own experiences, my own thoughts, and just hold that space organically and authentically for them, I am excited for them. They don't necessarily need to know why I'm so positive and, just a safe space holder. If they ask, I'll share, but usually that doesn't happen because most people come to me after hearing about my near death experience.
Right. So do you ever have them, questioning you about what it's like, the transition from here to there? Do you get into any detail like that about your own personal experience with them?
Yeah, so if they ask, I am more than happy to share, just like I'm more than happy to share on camera with people around the world and with you. Um, and yeah, we can get into some deep conversations, and it's awesome. I just share my experience, and if they have questions about it, I answer with my own experiences, sometimes what I think they mean. And I feel like it's very cathartic and healing for both of us at that point. And I've, I've only seen them, relax into it. I don't think I've freaked out too many people or anybody that I'm aware of.
No, I'm sure it's very therapeutic and burns off a lot of curiosity and whatnot. I mean, they know that you've been through it and that they're just about to, so it must be really interesting connection. Like, because I also had an NDE, but I haven't had the opportunity yet to share it with anybody in an end of life situation. And so I'm kind of looking forward to that one day when I can actually use it,
Yeah,
directly with someone. Yeah.
I think my most rewarding experience was I was invited to share my story at a nursing home. An events director knew I had a near death experience, had written a book, and asked me to come share it in the nursing home. And I agreed and I went, and it was so powerful. People who'd probably never told anybody about their NDEs started raising their hands like I had one. And, these war vets that had died a couple of times that hadn't told anybody, these people on the brink of, transition, fearful, just relaxing and asking deeper questions, and just the community that opened up around this conversation of life and death and the transition. And it was so authentic and so real. And people asked, well, does dying hurt? And I'm sure you get asked that a lot too as
Mhm.
a end of life doula, or they know that the process of it hurts, but as soon as you leave your body, there's no pain.
Right.
So explaining those differences also gave them peace. It was absolutely beautiful. I had a room of 30 people who I think 7 or 8 people also raised their hand saying they had an experience. And one person said, can I talk to you one on one? Like I need to talk to somebody. And it was so honoring to hold space for people and be that person who shared my story to inspire other people to share their stories.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a real direct connect, and that's awesome. I really admire that. You had mentioned multiple bodies, and I don't know if you were sure how many, but I was wondering if when you mentioned multiple, you had multiple bodies. Were you referring to multiple lifetimes or actual bodies during that one experience?
Actual bodies.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So at first it was no body, like no physical form, just pure consciousness. And then for in that white area with the numbers, I felt like I had some type of semblance of this body. And by the time I got into the next part of my experience with all of the beings, I was what looked like a Russian nesting doll, a robot, a snowman, and something else. I mean, it was just absolutely wild.
That's really wild, especially the snow person.
Yeah, for somebody who, well, and it's funny, I'm in Colorado, and I've never been a fan of the cold and the snow because it set off my illness symptoms. And I didn't remember Earth or my earthly body, and yet I remembered I didn't like snow. And then I ended up as a snowman.
Was the presence of God at one point there simultaneously with the presence of Jesus? Do you know
No.
what I mean? Or is it just kind of they blended into one another?
Yeah, the closest thing to God that I would say, which was so much bigger than our word for God,
Hmm.
the creator, the one that answered my prayer, was only really noticeable in my first part of my experience in the void. And then by the time I moved on to different parts of my experience, that present wasn't necessarily, I wasn't aware of it, at least. So this Jesus master teacher consciousness was a separate part and separate person. And then that was separate than the seven beings in the last place that were very powerful as well.
Okay, so they were never all together with you at the
No,
same time. It was all separate. Okay,
yeah.
that's cool. Wow. You had also mentioned about paranormal activity or things that were happening to you. Was this is prior to your NDE or both before and after? Hmm?
Yeah, well, no longer after, which I'm thankful for. So it's paranormal stuff started happening when I was 10,
Was that with the
and
dark beings that we were talking about, the attachments?
around the same time. So it
Around the
didn't
same
start
time?
off so dark. It started, just seeing ghosts, which they were harmless. They paid me no attention. It didn't scare me. Um, I think the next thing that happened was I saw an old antique doll that was, generational, had no eyes, turn its head and glow its eyes red at me in the middle of the night. And that was absolutely terrifying. And then it got into there was this shadow that would cross the walls of our basement, and it had a top hat and a cape and just darkness. It felt dark, it was scary. And it wasn't until I released my first book that I really learned who this thing was. It's a well known dark entity from around the world that appears to children in basements.
I really love the part where you were talking about the sort of blend of realities, like you were in one and you were seeing the others at the same time, and you could see how they were sort of interacting with each other. I thought that was like that. I put like the hairs on my arms kind of raised when you said that. I find that so mind blowing, you know,
Yeah, so it's so funny that you caught on to that one because
especially when you have a knowing of it, because for sure we're interacting with them now, but like you had a knowing of it, you were there in it. Wow,
yeah,
it's
the
crazy.
funny thing is I didn't even realize like how cool slash crazy slash everything that experience was, but that is also what my mom hung on to when I told her about my experience. She's like, dual realities and what? And you experience the same thing, but or different together, and all these different dimensions were happening at once, possibilities. And it
Crossing
wasn't
over each
until,
other, like,
yeah,
wow, that's just
it
blows
wasn't
my
until
mind,
recently that I actually thought about that. Like, yeah, that is kind of crazy.
right? Like this is the type of thing that you can have happen in astral projection, which is what I do quite often. But it's different. Like I can't imagine like what it was like for you because it happened to you involuntarily. You're just all of a sudden experiencing multiple
Yeah,
realities at once.
these different realities. Well,
Yeah.
I at the time it was like, oh, cool, whatever. It was like I knew about it, but it didn't phase me at all. So it didn't take until recently to be like, oh, right, that is actually very different than here.
Yeah, and I think it's
Uh,
because your ego wasn't aware of it at all when it
yeah,
was happening, right?
yeah, it was
It was
just
just your
everything
soul.
was
Yeah.
so matter of fact. All I experienced was love, curiosity, and joy. So sometimes I'd be curious about something, but it wasn't like, I didn't need to know the why or the how behind any of it. It was just like, oh, cool. And then
Mhm.
move on.
Yeah. So cool, so cool. So you mentioned that you have a couple of books. What are the titles of the books? I'll put them in the description and everything, so maybe you can tell us how we can get a hold of them, what they're about.
Sure. My first book, White Flame, is about my NDE experience. The subtitle is My Paranormal Metaphysical Journey Leading Up to My Near Death Experience. And that one really is all about everything that happened from when I was 10 to 27, I believe, around paranormal, metaphysical, and my near death experience. So it goes more into detail about that entity I saw, different entities, metaphysical stuff, and
Kind of tie
really,
it all in together, right?
yeah, it ties it all in together, why that was so relevant to what happened leading up to my near death experience and even the next year following my near death experience and the struggle that it was, reassimilating back into this life. Um, so White Flame is all about my NDE, and Wired to be Dysfunctional is co-authored with my mom.
Wired to be dysfunctional. What a great
Yes.
title. That's awesome.
So the chronic rare illness I was talking about is myoclonus dystonia. And my sister, who has a master's in psychology, sat in on one of my neurology appointments just a few years ago and came out of it. And she said, "Oh my gosh, you're literally wired for dysfunction." So the name of the book is Wired to be Dysfunctional. It's all about our journey with myoclonus dystonia. My mom, as the advocate researcher, like gung ho, gonna save her child. Me, as a child, experiencing this crazy rare chronic illness, being failed over and over and over again by different industries, and the resilience we both have to get me to, at the time, it was life saving brain surgery.
Mm,
And so, very different stories. One is very medically based, one is very spiritually based, metaphysical.
mhm.
And my third book is coming out, Leads to Nowhere. And that is why and how they are so intertwined, and how both stories actually led me to being able to heal myself.
Oh, how interesting. That's cool. A little trilogy. I
Yeah,
like that.
so it's coming out this year. I finally
Very
figured
cool.
out how the two stories were related.
Well, Bree, thank you so much for being on the show. Really enjoyed your just a breath of fresh air. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thanks for having me, John.
My pleasure.
And thank you for being an end of life doula. We need
Oh,
more.
thank you too.